Hi, everyone. It's Roger here again, and great to have you all back. And I am super excited about this next session where we have Salman Khan from Khan Academy here with us. Hi, Sal. How are you?
Hi, Roger. I'm doing well. How are you?
Very good. Very, very good. And very excited about this session we're about to have. The title of the session is actually right off your book, which was from 2012, which is the One World Schoolhouse 2.0, the Khan Academy vision in a post-pandemic world. And I think at the time in 2012, because when I read the book at the time, I was super inspired. And of course, you'd already grown Khan Academy. And I was like, wow, you have, I think at the time, about 10 million students. And now you're at like 100 million. So there's been a huge growth during that time. And I would love for you, before we get into the conversation about the key things in that book and in your vision, to just share, especially with the pandemic, what for you would you say has been the things that have changed the most and maybe changed the same over these last 9 years since that book came out?
Oh, over the last 9 years. Well, you pointed out one of them. It was just a matter of scale. I remember if you rewind a little bit before those 9 years, it was about 11 years ago, 12 years ago that I was one guy operating out of actually the same walk-in closet that I'm right now. So that hasn't changed. The pandemic has brought me back into this closet. But I used to daydream back then that, one day this could maybe reach, a lot of folks know this started with as a family project, and then people who were not my family were using it, and it was in the thousands and the tens of thousands. And that's when I was one guy operating in this closet. And I used to dream that one day it could reach 1 million or 10 million folks. And as you mentioned, over the last 10 years, or 12 years, 13 years, we're now at, I think, 120 or 130 million registered users. About 20, 30 million folks come every month. I think we've done a big push in international. There's 50 translation projects or localization projects of Khan Academy around the world. Here in the United States, we're the official practice for the SAT, which is the major assessment for getting into college. The number of subjects and grades we're covering is dramatically larger and deeper. One of the pillars of our vision has always been, can we offer all of the core academic material from pre-K through the core of college in all of the major subjects in all of the major languages, which is mildly delusional for a guy operating out of a walk. And can we do it in a way that's personalized and eventually can provide a signal to the broader world around credentials and job opportunities and things like that? We've made progress. I would say in the math and science side, that content is there already. We're constantly refining and improving it. We're starting to think about and we already do have content in the humanities, but we want to think about how do we go deeper there. We're starting to think very seriously about how do we provide signals or credentials to get opportunities in college or jobs. And then, it's a constant refinement of the software. We're working a lot more with schools now. There's about 250,000 teachers who use Khan Academy in some way, shape, or form around the world in their classrooms. So in a lot of ways, it's the same. In fact, it's the exact same mission: free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. It's the exact same vision: make all the content available, offer it in a way that meets the students and the teachers where they are, provide signals to the world so that people get opportunity. I'm still in the same location, but the scale and the ambitions are larger and maybe feel less delusional, even though they've gotten probably bigger.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the most amazing things. I still remember at the time when I read the book, there was a number of other, almost exactly the same time, a number of other books coming out as well. There was Ken Robinson and everything that he was talking about, and it's such a shame he's no longer with us because he had such a incredible insight as to what could happen with education. And Seth Godin, who also is one of our speakers in the summit, who had just written this ebook that went viral, which was "Stop Stealing Dreams: What Are Schools For?" And we were just talking about you in the session I had with him, and just how you've gone out and actually made these things happen. And really, one of the big things I think, which is what we have today, very different from back in 2012, where we had a number of leading lights talking about these things happening and some of them taking action. And at that point, actually, I was at the Green School in Bali. And so we were doing our own little part in Bali to see what we could do to change the education system for environment. Today, we have had the entire COVID crisis that has closed schools down. We have had the response of the Biden administration with the billions that they're actually talking about putting towards education right now. We've had some of the first IPOs in edtech like Coursera and so on that have all happened in the last 6 months as well, in the last 3 months actually. What would you say around your view of where the world has now moved towards actually not just knowing these are problems that we need to be fixing, but actually getting into action in it? Is it where you thought things might be back in 2012? Is it accelerated beyond it? What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. I think to your point, Ken Robinson, Seth Godin, others, 10, 12 years ago, I think we did have this wave of renewed first principle thinking on education. People started to look at it and say, yeah, why do we do things the way they are? Some of this is actually somewhat absurd, and I've obviously talked a lot, and none of what I've talked about have been fundamentally new ideas. This notion that we can't just keep pushing people ahead, even if they got an 80% and they had a 20% gap in one concept, then you build on that, then they get a 10% in the next concept, and then they get to algebra or a more advanced topic and nothing makes sense because they've accumulated all these gaps. Wouldn't it be great if there were a way to let every person learn at their own pace? Maybe that, and I actually have more conviction than ever that that is the reason why so many students struggle, especially with math and science, but frankly, all subjects. They keep accumulating gaps, and at some point, those gaps become debilitating. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, a lot of conversation about it. We were about 15 years into the internet. As soon as the internet came out in the late 90s, everyone was talking about online education. There was a little bit of a wave. I think it kind of peaked with MIT OpenCourseWare as the real social mission there. There was other things there that universities were essentially trying to profit from the internet and probably creating some value in the process. 2010 to 2012 timeframe, there was a renewed interest. That's when Khan Academy really, I think, came on folks' radar. To your point, Coursera shortly thereafter, slightly different model with MOOCs, higher education. They've gravitated more towards, I would say, post-secondary or postgraduate education. You're a computer science graduate, you want to go into machine learning, you want to go into data science. That's the type of thing where we've seen a lot. Just recently, edX was acquired by 2U. At least the assets were acquired, edX being not for profit. So we see that a lot of these things have gotten to scale. Coursera and everyone, a lot of folks are talking about their IPO. I think the scale has been faster and better than I would have expected. What has been slower than expected is, even though these ideas of personalization and mastery learning are, I would say, more mainstream than they've ever been, almost any educator knows about them now and to some degree intellectually agrees with them. It's been slower to actually penetrate the classroom and have that change happen. Now, I oftentimes think that things can go very slowly and then all of a sudden they can hockey stick. So we're definitely working on several projects where we think we could start to accelerate this type of work. And once again, if you go back to when I was just in a closet, it would have seemed like science fiction that Khan Academy was reaching over 100 million folks. Right, but then once things start to pick up, I've started to have ambitions of billions. How do we reach as many? And not just reach them and help them where they're having that one question, but how do we really work with them on a regular basis, work with their educators, work with parents so that we can really move the dial? And, at a global level and even at a national level, we still see that the outcomes aren't where they need to be. So there's a lot of work left.
Right. I mean, the first thing definitely for everyone who's listening is definitely pick up the book and read it so you really get the basics of just the vision that Sal put out there, and then the fact that he's actually doing it. But we do want to talk about the 2.0 now, which is, well, what does this now mean for the next decade, right? And we are moving into a decade where it isn't just that everyone is very open and ready for a change, and not just parents and students, but actually even companies that are now getting involved in sponsoring all sorts of programs. I think actually it was very recently that you were also part of like a financial literacy for all program that also has got started. So lots of different, and you were talking about different projects as well. Are you able to share some of those, what you would say are the big things at the moment that you could see being what actually influences that hockey stick right now?
Yeah, there's a bunch of efforts that we're working on, any of which could influence that hockey stick. Some of them are already on a bit of a hockey stick trajectory. We're doing a big effort in early learning, Khan Academy Kids. That is already reaching, and that's math, reading, writing, social emotional learning. The app is free. It's funded by philanthropy. I encourage anyone who has a student between the ages of 3 and 7 in their life to check it out. We're seeing unusual engagement. The efficacy studies have been very strong on that. It's been growing like a hockey stick. Especially since the pandemic, although it's really been in existence a little over 2 years. Our partnerships with districts are starting to really pick up. Khan Academy, a lot of folks associate it with a direct to learner, direct to consumer lens. But from the earliest days, we've created teacher tools. We've always had a point of view of how it could be used in the classroom, how it could potentially even transform a classroom. That was what my original TED Talk was about. But in the last 3-4 years, we realized that if we want to really make this systemically relevant, we have to do the hard work of support, training in districts, integrating with their rostering systems, a lot of the back end, less sexy stuff, but that's essential if you really want to become a part of the system. One of the things that I'm working on right now, this is a very early stage pilot, but if it works, it could be a very, very big deal. We're working with a historically Black college and university who is interested in the college algebra problem, which I've been fascinated by for the last 10 years. And for those of y'all who don't know, today we're in a world where 70% of college graduates in the United States, the numbers are pretty similar globally, when they get to university, when they get to college, 70% have to take remedial math. And that remediation isn't 11th grade math or 12th grade math. It's middle school math. The universities are essentially saying you're not even ready to learn college algebra yet. And college algebra is equivalent to algebra 2. It's equivalent to a ninth or 10th grade math. So you've had that issue. And at the other end, all of these students are going through these courses. So all of this time and resources are to some degree wasted. If you talk to any governor in the US, one of their biggest issues is how much money and resources is spent on developmental math, on remediation, just to even get into college algebra.
Right.
So one of the projects is, could we create a course in partnership with a university where students in 9th, 10th, 11th grade, as part of their algebra course, can show mastery on Khan Academy, and then that mastery gives them the college algebra credit. So essentially short circuit this whole process in a very positive way. So students just get that off the table. And that, for folks who aren't kind of in the know, that is the single biggest blocker for most students, especially students from historically under-resourced communities, to getting their college diploma. So I'm very excited about that. There's another project that I launched as part of the pandemic. It's another not-for-profit, but very complementary, called Schoolhouse.world, which is about giving free tutoring. I talk a lot in One World Schoolhouse from the book about the value of near-peer tutoring, and that's a resource that is not leveraged enough in schools. Well, when the pandemic hit, even more, and especially post-pandemic, people are going to need that really focused, high-dosage tutoring. But how do you make that cost-effective? How do you make that scale? Well, what if you could leverage hundreds of thousands of near peers, high school students, college students, or volunteers? It could be retired professors to then tutor other folks. And we launched that last summer. That's continued to gain a lot of momentum. People are excited about that.
And that's all peer-to-peer as well, right? Where you've actually got students, you've got others that actually then are creating their own groups where they're then tutoring through. And it's actually very interesting, because I love that initiative, and I was looking at Schoolhouse.world and the actual similarities in some way to some of the organizations in Asia, like Baiju, or some of the Chinese organizations, where they have all merged the tuition base and the high touch with the high tech is a really critical part. And you talked about that as well. And these partnerships you're doing are very much about bringing the teacher into it too. So I'd love, after you've shared any other initiatives you're about to share, for us to come back to that point about how this merger of teachers, especially because we've got all these educators on this summit right now, how they can actually be using technology in the best way to actually provide the best experience for the students.
Yeah, no, I mean, so Schoolhouse.world, definitely exciting. There's another angle of that, which is, as people tutor other folks, you can imagine that's a very powerful signal of what they're capable of. And there's a lot of debate about standardized testing, and I'm happy to talk about that. But what I'm fascinated about, I do think traditional standardized tests have a place, but there are other ways, in a standardized way, to form a signal of what someone is capable of. And obviously, if you're tutoring me in calculus and you're highly reputed, you for sure know your calculus, but that also means that you likely have strong communication skills, empathy, you're doing good work for other folks. So I think there's another interesting angle above the tutoring there. We're doing a big push in science right now. We've always had science on Khan Academy, but we're trying to make sure we're comprehensive in middle school, high school, and early college science. And then above and beyond that, it's just making sure that as many people as possible are aware of what we're doing. The financial literacy work you've just talked about, we've been having a partnership with Bank of America for I think we're in year 9 now. But as part of this consortium of all of these companies and the NBA and the NFL, a lot of folks are getting focused on this right now. I think there's a possibility of getting to the next level there as well.
And that's actually really interesting, just the fact that over the last couple of years, there has been this shift in a lot of the companies out there who are seeing they have a social responsibility for what, not just paying their staff, but what their staff then are able to do to support themselves or to upskill themselves. And that really is one part I want to cover as well, because for everyone who's on the summit, we have those who are primary school, secondary school, university, but we also have a lot who are teaching all the way through into adulthood. And Genius U actually started with entrepreneurship. And in the same way, I love what you said in your book about Swiss cheese learning, where once you have things you need to synthesize, like, you give the example of calculus, and just what you're just talking about in terms of algebra, if you don't have the pieces, even if you've got like 95% all the way through, there's 5% holes, then eventually it all falls down from where you need to get to. And for sure, if you're going to start a business up, or even if you're going to go and try and figure out how to reskill for a new job, there's a whole bunch of Swiss cheese going on there, where there are basic things around leadership, interpersonal skills. How do you even balance the books to actually start a business, which most people don't get that information anywhere, and it's so critical. So there's an element, and by the way, I remember at the time in 2012, when I read your book, it was a few years after the global financial crisis. And I think that was the first time you took some of your business background and decided to actually do some videos for adults. So what's your view on, or plan on what Khan Academy is going to be doing going forward in the entire adult side?
Yeah, already from the beginning, a surprising number of Khan Academy's usage has come from what we could categorize as adults. And sometimes I don't know if it's a child using an adult's account, et cetera, but we do hear, even on the academic side, from teachers, from parents saying, hey, I was able to use that in order to refresh, in order to help my children or help my students. We definitely have a lot of graduate students, or in certain cases, even professors that say, hey, I was going into a new field. I went to Khan Academy to review my statistics. I even had a very prominent Nobel Prize winner in economics saying, hey, I actually reviewed my economics on Khan Academy before I had to go teach a first-year course again. So we have a lot of that. But to your point, my original background pre-Khan Academy, I worked in tech a bit, and then post-business school, I was an analyst at a hedge fund. And I saw, while I was tutoring my cousins as a hobby, and I was tutoring them in academic areas, that even at my hedge fund, when we were trying to hire junior analysts, and they would be summa cum laude from top universities in the country or in the world, I would ask them simple questions like, there's a house down the street that costs $1 million. There's a house across the street from that house that's identical that you can rent for $4,000 a month. Which one makes more sense to do? And ask me any questions. And it's amazing. And someone said, well, it's always good to buy. I was like, okay, that house is now $2 million. The rent is still $4,000. Which is the right one to do? And it's amazing that these basic frameworks of understanding present value, or understanding, one payment over a long period of time versus a lump sum. How do you compare these things? Even people who took advanced courses in economics had trouble with these frameworks. Then the financial crisis hit. And it was clear, even when I was watching the news, that folks didn't really understand, even the people reporting, even some of the people who were being interviewed, who came from the major financial firms, what illiquidity, what insolvency is, what are the levers that the Federal Reserve actually plays. People didn't really understand what was happening with collateralized debt obligations and mortgage-backed securities. And so I started to make videos on it. I was already making videos in algebra and whatever else, and physics for my family. And then I started getting letters, emails from the major news outlets saying that they were using my videos to prepare before reporting on the financial crisis. And then the first national press that Khan Academy ever got was in 2010, fall of 2010, actually, no, fall of 2009, actually, which was at the peak of the financial crisis. They brought me onto CNN, and I was there for 20 minutes with my blackboard. It was on the Rick Sanchez show. Someone could look it up on YouTube if they want to see that, to see a younger Sal. But I was there explaining what a mortgage-backed security is, what a collateralized debt obligation, how does the insolvency, or at least illiquidity, of one bank affect the illiquidity of another bank, and how could it be a follow-on effect? People weren't understanding that, and even today, our videos on personal finance, and I guess you could say capital markets are quite popular. I remember I got a letter from this was in this was in that same time frame around 2010. I got a letter from someone from, I will not say from what bank, saying, "Thank you so much for that video on mortgage-backed securities. I now know what I do for a living." Which I think explains exactly what had happened.
That's hilarious. This is I mean, obviously we're talking 10 years ago with that crisis, but we're right in the some people think in the latter part, some people think in the middle of the current crisis. And there is definitely a big gap where there are people losing jobs, but there's kids deciding, do I even go to university? And then at the same time that there are companies going, geez, we actually need people for certain roles here as well. And I remember at the same time when your book came out, that was when I was meeting the likes of people like Aaron Barley, who just set up Udemy, people like Sebastian Thrun, who just set up Udacity. And especially in Sebastian's case, he was taking the approach of going to those companies and companies like Google to say, hey, like let's put a course in there for people that actually are going to be engineers for driverless cars. And of course, now Google is doing their own certifications as well. That you're doing partnerships with schools, you're doing partnerships with so many organizations. Where do you see Khan Academy going in terms of partnerships or even sponsorships with companies and what they need right now?
Yeah, we have a ton of corporate partners, and what I talk to them about, what they tend to be interested when they're talking to us, is they see the fundamental core academic foundation as being very shaky amongst even college graduates or a lot of folks that they hire. A lot of what I talk about is we can talk about specialized skills like machine learning and data science, all of these topics that people, it's very in vogue and they are very relevant. But the reality is there's a large chunk of the workforce that really doesn't have fluency in algebra. And I remember one of my early advisors on this Khan Academy journey, he runs a publicly traded restaurant chain. And he told me, look, Sal, I divide my employees, regardless of what their credentials are, between those who understand algebra and those who don't. And not that you're going to have to solve systems of equations every day if you're managing a restaurant or anything like that. But he saw that the people who understood algebra, they were able to think a little bit more critically. They were able to use deductive reasoning a little bit more. And those are the folks that, even if they didn't have a high school diploma, he would put more on a management track. And even the folks who did have a college diploma, but didn't really exhibit some of those analytical thinking skills, they weren't going to make a lot of progress in their careers. And so I think a lot of the employers, a lot of the corporations we work with who are sponsoring a lot of the work on Khan Academy, they recognize that the foundation that we're building is essential to just having a reasonably good workforce, hopefully a great workforce. They also recognize even many adults need that core basic thing. And frankly, if you have that, there's kind of this image that at least I had when I was in high school or college, that to work in a white collar job at a corporation, you have to have all of these super specialized skills and all of that. The reality is if you can communicate reasonably well, carry yourself reasonably well, write reasonably well, I would say at like a strong high school level, if you had some decent analytical skills, once again, at kind of a medium to strong high school level, you're kind of unstoppable in a corporate setting. And on top of that, if you have some specialized knowledge, and even the specialized knowledge isn't that specialized. I've gone to friends or I've gone into environments where, say a biotech firm, and they're talking about the Krebs cycle, and I'll engage. I was like, oh, the Krebs cycle, you're talking about, when the glucose gets turned into 2-pyruvates. And they're like, how do you know about that? And I'm like, that's high school biology. You just surprised because most people don't actually learn it. So I'm a big believer, if you master the basics, you're pretty unstoppable. And then the specialized skills will come, especially if you learn how to learn.
Right. Well, I mean, that whole point, which again is a key thing in your book around universities and what's the role of the higher education side, where a lot of people, as we've known, have seen university as a stepping stone to a better job, right? It's going to give you a chance to get higher salaries, etc. But then university itself doesn't necessarily do much to prepare you for that job. It's doing more on the academic side. And you make that point, well, we got to decide what is education for, right? Is it more for being an academic and ending up going and getting a PhD, or is it for you to be able to actually, live your life in the right way? And university is going through a crisis right now, not just in terms of the actual universities themselves, but the actual student debt and what's happening around that right now. What's your view on this next 10 years? And where universities will go? Like, is it going to be a different model, do you think? Do you think it's going to, like, what's your thoughts around that, not just in the US, but globally from what you see?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting 10 years. I think you're going to see on one level pathways form that are not, when most of the debate historically between should someone go to college or not go to college, it is a bit of a stratified conversation. If we had this conversation 20 years ago, we'd be saying, okay, maybe not everyone's cut out for college. They can go learn a trade or work in some type of a service industry. And you can do good things, becoming an electrician or something like that. And oftentimes make more than the university graduate. I think what's going to change and what's different about the conversation we're having is I think we're going to see alternative pathways that aren't in some ways viewed as stratified. Those could lead to outcomes that are just as intellectual, just as creative, or in certain cases, even more intellectual, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive. They could sit in conjunction with each other. Some people go to university, might choose these pathways. Some people might choose to do either. You mentioned the Google certification. I think that's actually a really, really big deal. When Google, which famously hires the best and the brightest, but if you want to classify that way, when they start saying, look, we don't, we're going to keep recruiting at top universities, et cetera, because we just have a voracious appetite for talent. But we also are going to create these certifications, these courses you can take on Coursera, and you can end in a certification on Google, where if you pass it and do well, we're going to put you in the same pool as the people with A GPAs from Stanford and MIT. That's a game changer, because then that same student who could have thought about going to Stanford or MIT says, well, that's maybe right for some folks, but for me, this is a good path. Or maybe very few students have the chance to go to a school like Stanford or MIT. The students who might have gone to the local community college or just because of family circumstance couldn't go to college, maybe had to support their families, but are just as capable or just as bright. Or maybe later in their lives, when they're 30, they start to realize, oh, I'm actually interested in this. They can do the Google certification, which wasn't an avenue that was available before. I think we're going to see more and more of this. Amazon is doing a similar thing for finding software engineers. You don't necessarily need a computer science degree. You just really need to know how to code well. Similarly, if you have a computer science degree, but you don't know how to code well, you're not going to get a job at Amazon or at Google. I think the other thing, and I talk to university presidents and provosts all the time about this, clearly the fact that whether you're a computer science major or an art history major, it takes 4 years in the US to get that bachelor's diploma, tells you that they didn't say, what do you really need to know? They said, we have 4 years, let's fill it up with stuff. Because no matter what you major in, it's 4 years. I think there's also been a statistical confusion over the last, frankly, 100 years as people have been really promoting college between correlation and causation. College is an artifact of, if you go back 200 or 300 years, it was really finishing school for nobility. Then as the Industrial Revolution came, they used it as a proxy for who could get essentially the white collar jobs. Then it became more aspirational. But the underlying structure of university has not changed over that 100 or 200 years. Even things like, and then it's kind of taken over more things. Early lawyers, it was mainly an apprenticeship. Early medicine was mainly an apprenticeship. Then it became more of a formal academic program that became part of graduate schools at universities. I think next 10 years, universities are going to have to take a hard look at, does it have to be 4 years? Can you mix and match with work experience? What's the role of apprenticeships? When students come into a room, do we just lecture at them? They could get an on-demand video for that. How do we make it more action-oriented, more activity-based? How do we let them create a portfolio of the future, which I wrote about in the book, which is more about your competencies and your portfolios of creative work and what other human beings view you as versus a transcript of a bunch of classes and GPAs.
Right. Yeah. Well, I have a question I'm going to ask, which is on something that happened recently, just on the basis of what you just said. And then I'm going to just jump into a few how-tos or like bits of advice for all the educators on here that you might have. It was actually about the fact that I think it was in May that you got an honorary degree from Harvard. That's what I read. So first of all, congratulations on that. And then secondly, is there an irony in that in some way that people have to like work so hard to get into Harvard to make it happen? And here you are as someone who wasn't even brought up as an educator or choosing education, but then through Khan Academy, then found yourself with like the biggest school in the world. And now you're gifted the degree, right? Like how do you see that all like showing up in your world?
Yeah, no, first of all, I'm very honored by that honorary degree. I know that that's not something that they take lightly, and nor do I. But somewhat jokingly, my mom, who was always pushing me to get some form of a doctorate, ideally an MD, but even a PhD would have been decent. She definitely told me that this one does not count. So I, like I take it as an honor. I and I have no. I'm a big fan of a lot of what happens at colleges and universities. Most of the real cutting edge basic research in the world is happening on university campuses. I love the fact that that is coupled with the learning side of it. I do think some of my best memories, I probably have a dream once a week of I'm back in college, and which is really a sign that it's a real formative time in your life. I met my wife in college. Still probably 80% of my best friends are people that I knew from college. My college roommates are still some of the closest people in my life. So it's a very important experience that I hope that my children can have something like that. Now, the reality though is I was fortunate to go to have that full college experience. A lot of folks, most people who go to college are not going to a residential college where they're having late night philosophical conversations in the dorms. They're going to commuter colleges. They're maybe working and then just trying to get their diploma in their spare time. For a lot of folks, college is not working out the way that it should. You mentioned cost. I was to some degree lucky. The costs were lower 20 years ago when I was in college, but I was also lucky. My family was not making a lot of money. My mom was really kind of right at the poverty line. So I got really good financial aid. I was able to go to a college that gave good financial aid. So I had debt, and then I was able to get a good job that I was able to pay down that debt. But a lot of folks, the costs have gone higher. It's been harder in some cases for people to get the jobs. So the math doesn't make as much sense for a lot of folks. And even on the coming of age journey, I think I had a great coming of age journey in college. I think there's still a lot of opportunity to do it, but there could be new ways to do it. Imagine going with a cohort of 20 folks and a few mentors and traveling the world while you get apprenticeships or while you get jobs and while you leverage Khan Academy or Coursera or other resources to learn some of the harder skills on top of that. That also would be a powerful coming of age journey. So I see, to the original question, the next 10 years, you're going to see a lot more variety, a lot more diversity. And the universities that really index on what do we really need to do to give a rich experience for students? Mm-hmm. What do we really need to do to prepare them are going to succeed? A lot of the coming of age stuff that we all love about college, they weren't an explicitly designed part of the university experience. They didn't say, oh, let's make sure they have as many late night conversations about philosophy in the dorms. Let's make sure it happens, but it's not engineered. And when you actually get into the classroom, it's not engineered to maximize human to human interaction. Famously, a lot of universities, you go into 300-person lecture hall and you're just lectured at. I think if people don't change that, then it's going to accelerate people saying, well, maybe I could try something else.
That was one of the things Seth was saying was inspired by you, was when he was, and I think you talk about this as well in the schoolhouse, in the One World Schoolhouse, the idea of lectures at night and then teaching during the day. But the teaching is not about the lecture teaching; it's about the guiding, and it's about really working on the actual problems and so on. And this kind of brings me onto just a few things that would be your insights to those educators out there, where frankly over the last year, all bets are off. Like how we've gone about, like teaching online, how we've gone about broadening who we might be actually reaching. So they're now global. All these things have all changed massively when we can't just do the face-to-face. So I just want to point out a few and just get your insights in them. The first one is something which actually links to your mission, where you say the mission of Khan Academy is to provide a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And you talk about self-paced learning, but also self-placed learning, because it's about anywhere too. For every educator on here, how would you suggest they look at where their classroom is and where their students could be that they're bringing on board and then looking after?
Yeah, I think this is a central question. I think every educator out there recognizes that if you're in a class of 30 students, those 30 students all have unique needs. They're all at different levels of readiness. They all have different, the term now is unfinished learning, or they might have gaps in their knowledge. And as a teacher, you always wish that you could replicate yourself so that you can do one-on-one, essentially tutoring sessions with every one of those students, but that's just not the reality of the classroom. And so you try to find someplace in the middle that can capture as many students as possible, not bore some of the kids who might be ready for more, and not lose as many kids as possible. Now, research tells us that the average teacher, as they try to do this, actually ends up catering to the 23rd percentile. And even at the 23rd percentile, you're still losing 99% of the kids because 22% of the kids are still going to feel lost. And then you have 76, 77% of the kids who are still going to feel like they could have gone a little bit faster. And it's not always the same kids. Some kids might have a strong foundation for one concept, but then might need some remediation or gap filling in another concept. Another thing that we saw, especially during the pandemic, we observed and worked with a lot of teachers doing heroic things in terms of transitioning quickly to pandemic learning, whatever you want to call it. And they quickly realized that, hey, it's not okay to just lecture for an hour on Zoom, that you have to really engage kids. You got to ask them questions. You got to pull them out of the screen. You got to put them into breakout rooms. You have to put active learning every 10, 15 minutes. You have to mix it up, make them stand up, make them do some jumping jacks. But it's good that we've been having that conversation. But the truth is that that's always been a best practice, even if you are in a classroom, to make it as humanly interactive as possible. So my hope and my advice, for whatever it's worth, is when people finally get back, I think there's going to be more appreciation for the fact that we can breathe the same air, that we can give each other a hug, that we're in the room together. And I'd like to believe that, plus the experience of distance learning not being about lecturing, plus people like me and others, for whatever it's worth, saying, hey, the classroom should not be about lecture, it should be about human to human engagement. I think the pandemic will have accelerated this notion that when humans get together, let's talk to each other, let's tutor each other, let's do games and simulations with each other, let's not lecture at each other.
So, and leading on from that, one of the insights that you had, which I really love, is that distinction between pedagogy, which is what most people think is the core of an educational curriculum or system, which is very much about kids, and it's about how we teach kids. And then you also talk about adult learning and andragogy, or I think the book was Malcolm Knowles' book, The Adult Learner, which is all about not how do you teach adults, but how do adults discover and learn on their own? How do you guide them towards their own learning? And you make the point, which is maybe we should be looking at that for kids as well. That self-directed learning is really the key to all of this, and it's guiding them towards them doing their learning and owning it. How have your thoughts evolved, and just from what you've seen and how the results of Khan Academy, are you stronger on that now? Have you got new distinctions around that?
Yeah, I believe that more than ever. When this journey started for me, I was very indexed on the academic. Hey, let's make sure that someone can factor a polynomial. Let's make sure they understand Newton's laws. Those are still important, but now I'm more than ever a believer that the metacognitive capabilities of resilience, of being able to figure out what you don't know, that metacognition, that ability to then pull information, because we're in a renaissance. No time in human history has it been easier to pull information, and it's getting easier every minute, every day. But if someone isn't used to that, they're going to be at a significant disadvantage compared to the people who are used to that. So everything we talked about, a classroom where students are able to learn at their own time and pace, where they're able to help each other and tutor each other, that's not just in service to learning how to factor a polynomial. That's actually very explicitly building a metacognitive trait that's going to serve them very, very well in life. I'm not sure if they're going to have to factor a polynomial when they're 30 years old or 40 years old. I am 100% sure that when they're 30 years old or 40 years old, regardless of what job, they're going to thrive more if they can go to the internet, or if they could find resources at the local community college, or if they could tap someone in their workplace and say, hey, I need to learn this. Can I figure out how to do it? Who do I talk to? What resources can I get online? What experiences can I architect for myself so that I can get those experiences, so I can learn those skills? Folks who do that are going to be unstoppable. Folks who don't do that, no matter what their degrees, no matter what their GPAs, are going to stagnate.
Yeah, absolutely. This is so critical. Just how we start thinking differently about the student, and I really do hope that we are moving towards a world where the student is front and center in terms of the education that we provide. That if anything, if the student's not learning in a way that is working for them, just like in any hospitality industry or any customer facing industry, we'd then be saying, how can we do this better? And we can actually improve from there as well. So I just wanted to just finish by saying a really, really big thank you to you for everything you're doing with Khan Academy. You have a opportunity to say final words for everyone here who's listening as well. All those who are on the summit, while they're all educators, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's probably a minority who actually went through formal teaching education. Many became mentors after they retired from building their business. Many found a niche in a particular area where they've actually built an entire community that are learning from the things that they're actually sharing as well. But everyone every day wakes up and says, okay, well, how much of what I do is about being the practitioner and continuing to do what I'm doing? How much of it is me teaching others and helping others to get there too? What would be your final words of advice or just thoughts for everyone out there on their education journey?
Yeah, take anything I have to say with a grain of salt, but I generally do believe, and this is one of the reasons why I jump out of bed every morning, is even though there's a lot to be worried about in education, and there has been for decades now, I do think this is the most exciting time, maybe in human history. That's a big statement, to be an educator. The tools are still at a nascent level. I think, a lot of what we talked about, which could be viewed as problems, there are also opportunities. That's at a nascent level. There's some clear things that I think we can do better to, once again, it's not never technology for technology's sake. It's always actually, what are our pedagogical goals and how do we actually foster more human to human interaction? And I think we're at a early stage. As a historian, 500 years or 1,000 years in the future is going to look back at this time and realize that this was another inflection point in humanity, hopefully for the better, along a bunch of dimensions. So as an educator, what I try to do is I try to stay, I allow myself every now and then to think the big thoughts. What are the systemic changes that can happen? And then I try to think, what are the one step in front of the other type of actions that I can do to move in that direction, make a dent, and then also be happy with the small wins. If it can move the dial for even one learner, and I'm sure everyone here has that story of at least that one learner that they were able to unlock, you've changed a universe for that person. And then if you can then think about how can you do it for 2, 3 scale, it can really go to an arbitrarily large impact.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time here. This has been super inspiring. Really, really appreciate it. And looking forward to seeing what Khan Academy creates over the next decade. So thank you very much, Salman Khan.
Thanks for having me.